Alistair Croll basically ran this event last year. He's awesome for that. You should clap at him for that.
It's okay.
Mic's off. Okay.
Get off the stage. So if you want to make $3 billion, you can listen to Michael. If, on the other hand, you want to hear other stuff, it's really hard to follow that act, I have to say. My name's Alistair. I live here in Montreal. As Julian said, I worked on getting a lot of the content ready for this. I wanted to do something interesting for you guys. As a result, I've never presented this before. It's probably going to be a train wreck. I apologize in advance. I called it coefficients of friction because that was less rude than thrust and lube. But that's actually what this is about. And I had pictures of Magic Mike and some woman in a latex catsuit in the first round of these slides, and I thought, they may actually get picked up somewhere on SlideShare, so you can Google that. It's what Google image search and anonymous browsing is for anyway. And shamelessly, I recently announced with my co-author Ben Yoskovitz a book called Lean Analytics that's going to come out early next year. If you would like to go to bit.ly/lean friction, should be easy to remember, lean friction, it's kind of like thrust and lube, right? Lean friction, I would love it if you'd go there, sign up for the book, and fill out a survey. So, here we go. Your brain is really greedy. It turns out your brain is only about 2.5% of your body mass, but it consumes 20% of the food and oxygen that your body consumes. In fact, the brain grows really fast. When the baby is born, the reason you're born with a small head is so you don't kill your mother on the way out, and the size of your head barely fits through the mother's pelvis, even though 85% of its growth happens in the first 3 years of life. You were quite literally built to think. And as a result, you have lofty aspirations, you have huge dreams, you have lots of things you want to do. You want to build soaring monuments, you want to dive to the bottom of the abyss, you want to fly through the air, but your great brain writes all these checks your body can't cash. Because, as it turns out, while those ideas might be limitless and flawless, friction gets in the way. The world around you is full of messy atoms, and they're a pain in the butt to deal with. Just about the only thing physically humans are good at is long-distance running, because your spirit is eager, but your flesh is really weak. Put another way, you are born with good ideas and lousy containers, and I'm really sorry you're not that good at dealing with the real world. So as a result, humans built tools, because our brains allow us to build things that overcome the limitations of our container. Much of the history of human enterprise for the last 100,000 years has been about moving rocks around, learning to breathe underwater, flying through the sky. We don't have a hive mind like bees do, but we invented printing and broadcast. We invented things like voting to allow us to reach consensus. At least that's how it's supposed to work. We invented levers, pulleys, and wheels, and other things to overcome the limitations of our containers. A horse might be stronger than a human, but given enough block and tackle, a human is stronger than any horse. And I say this to tell you that most of human history has been about fighting the friction of the world around us with thrust sufficient to overcome it. This is why the steam era was awesome, because steam was going to transform humanity. Steam gave us free thrust, or almost free thrust, to overcome the inherent friction of the world. The invention of things like the steam engine were going to change everything about society. They gave us beasts of burden without all that annoying whining and feeding. This forever changed how we dealt with the world of atoms. We had these ideas in our head, and now we'd figured out how to deal with turning those ideas into atoms. It gave us the means of mass production. We went from an agrarian society focused on feeding ourselves enough, where land was the key, to one where the means of production and eventually mass production were the key to success. Because in a world where you're trying to get thrust to overcome friction, bigger is better. More thrust overcomes more friction, and that's why we see scale and size. Think about how big companies work to overcome the friction in their industries. This is sort of Michael Porter's model of competitive advantage, and he says that companies compete because they either control the materials they need for their industry, the labor in their industry, the capital in their industry, the processes in their industry, how that stuff gets out to the world, or the regulations in their regulatory environment. So if you're a big company, classic business theory circa 10 years ago at Harvard or Stanford would tell you, get really good at one of these things. You can either be a really small company and focus on something lean like your local gluten-free muffin shop, or you can get really big like General Electric and sew up a market and own the supply. In a thrust-based world where we're concentrating on getting big to overcome the inherent friction so we can make our ideas, we care about things like economies of scale. We care about things like vertical integration, owning your suppliers and distributors. We care about access to capital and making sure other people can't have any. But there's a consequence for these big companies. Big organizations are slow to adapt, which is why phone companies and banks and car makers and airlines wind up asking for government bailouts, dictating lousy terms to their partners and carriers. This is the inherent problem with big. And it's also why your org chart came from the Civil War. This is a guy named Daniel McCallum. I told you this is going to be a little ADD. I apologize in advance. Daniel McCallum, who actually brought the model of military structure to running the railroads. He found that when a railroad got to more than 50 miles long, things fell apart. And so he implemented a 50-mile-long manager, and he added a bunch of those, and eventually the railroad scaled, and that's what we call an org chart today. In fact, I'll quote the words here. He fixed railroads by bringing in military structure, large armies, vertical integration, and functional divisions under centralized command. If that doesn't sound like Dilbert's pointy-haired boss, you haven't worked in a big company yet. But there's a paradox here. It turns out that the steam age kind of broke some of our economic assumptions. In 1712, a brilliant British engineer named Newcomen invented something called the atmospheric steam pump. And this was a pump that pumped waters from coal mines, and it quite literally fueled the industrial age. Shortly after him, a guy named James Watt dramatically improved the design, and that's where we get the term Watts from. James Watt's design used 75% less coal, which made this guy, William Stanley Jevons, go, what was happening here? Because all of a sudden, coal consumption was going up, even though we'd become 4 times better at consuming it. We consumed less. Shouldn't the consumption go down as the efficiency increases? It turns out that's not what happens in markets. Think about your server today. Moore's law says that a server doubles in performance roughly every 18 months, right? So a server today is 2 servers a couple of years ago, 4 before that. In fact, it's a whole rack in 2007. And a rack in 2007, if you go back in time, is a whole row of a data center in 2002. And a row of a data center, if you go back far enough to around the time when we were all starting to get web browsers, is a data center. Think about that for a minute. Your server today is a data center back at the start of the web. Today's server is yesterday's data center, which makes Jevons go, why are we still building data centers? Because it turns out that efficiency creates demand. Jevons' paradox, as it is now called, and hat tip to James Duncan for pointing me at it, is that an increase in efficiency actually increases demand. So when Bill Gates envisioned a computer in every household, he didn't realize what would actually happen, which was a computer in every pocket that also happened to be a phone and a camera and a game console and a typewriter and GPS. Picard uses Android, not funny? Come on, wake up. Software, it turns out, eats everything, and that's not me saying it. That's a guy named Mark Andreessen. Maybe you've heard of him, crazy smart guy, invented the web browser, among other things. And what he meant by that, as I interpret it, was that anytime a system has digital inputs and digital outputs, everything in the middle eventually becomes software. And whether you believe Mark or you think he's a strange reincarnation of Dr. Evil, it is a true statement, and it's one that I am going to restate as you should focus on lube, not thrust. Because thrust-based businesses that tried to get to large scale so that their force could overcome the inherent friction in a market, are dying everywhere. Travel agencies are gone, Hipmunk is awesome. Record stores are gone, Beatport is awesome. Video stores are gone, Netflix is awesome. All of these businesses have fallen because they tried to use thrust. I have a lot of stores. I control a position in the middle of the market, as opposed to reducing the friction in their market. Today's competition in the world that your startups will succeed in is not about adding thrust. It's about eliminating the friction in the first place. Companies that continue, I'm not saying you won't need thrust. Amazon has a lot of thrust, but they started out by lubricating the online transaction world. Companies that continue to think that their value is based on more thrust rather than reducing friction are doomed. The world has gone from these scarce resistant atoms to abundant frictionless bits. And that's another important thing. The idea of abundance, not scarcity. This is Doc Searles. He's a very smart guy, one of the authors of the Clue Train Manifesto, and he talks about the economics of abundance, how you make money because of something rather than making money from something. And he points out that scarcity, while it has value, if I have a thing, you want to buy it from me, I have a diamond, it's worth something because they're hard to find, Scarcity has value, but abundance has value too. Think about Linux. IBM went from selling operating systems to making money because of free ones. Think about Monty Python. They put all their videos legally on YouTube, and their DVD sales went through the roof, over 10 times increase in sales. WordPress, plenty of people, myself included, don't make money from their blog, but do make money because of it. And Ben can't be here today, but Ben Yoskovitz, my co-author, who spent he credits his entire career to blogging. He even has an infographic he uses to tell people this, and he says, everything I've done professionally since 1996 is a result of blogging. And I'd like to give a quick shout out to Ben Jevin and the entire Go Instant team who sold their company to Salesforce last week for $76 million after 2 years with 1.76 million and 14 employees. Go Canada. And Ben credits everything, including that success, to doing stuff for free and getting jobs like this because of it. Jeff Jarvis, a very smart author, says when explaining the thrust, scarcity, lube, abundance thinking, that publishers see content as scarcity to control, whereas Facebook and Google see content as an abundant resource to exploit. Frictionless supply means there's an endless amount of demand, and you can make money because of abundance rather than from scarcity. So I would implore you to fight thrust with lube. If you're challenging large corporate giants, and I assume most of you are, then your future is fighting thrust-thinking companies with lube-inspired strategies. Fighting with thrust just sounds medieval, but fighting thrust with lube is downright sexy. And that's where you were going to see some dirtier pictures, but I thought that was a little more appropriate. Maybe not for Montreal. For one thing, it's really easy to start something in a lube world, right? In the old world, you had to get upfront investment, infrastructure, marketing costs, delivery, billing, all this other stuff. Today, I need investment, I'm going to crowdfund it. I need infrastructure, I'm going to use a cloud. Social media, PayPal, software as a service, the lean model, all of these things are very cheap and easy to do up front because you're exploiting the fact that the friction has gone away from the market. The friction of getting money, getting the word out, asking customers what they want, and so on. Upfront costs are almost nothing these days. The old model, the old thrust model, was ready, aim, fire. Ready, get your business plan together. Aim, get some money. Fire, launch your company. Today's model is actually aim, ready, aim, fire, ready. And that leans sort of fire off wildly in all directions until something goes ow. And then when that thing goes ow, keep aiming at it until you can reliably hit ow and then run that way. That's fire, aim, ready. And you can do it, and this is the most important thing in this presentation, because today the bullets are free. In the old days, and I said this yesterday, we used to sell what we could make. Today we make what we can sell. Your first employee is more likely to be a salesperson who gets out of the office and finds a need than a coder who stays in the office and builds a product. There are some consequences of the reduction of friction. First, you can learn from everything always. When we launched the Lean Analytics book last week, we ran a bunch of experiments. So now I know which of our proponents are most likely to have followers that complete a survey, or which of our proponents are most likely to click on a picture of the book to find out more about it, and so on. And we can use that information to understand how to target future markets. This is just in a tweet about a book. We're analyzing everything about it. You can analyze all the things, and you can do it for free because it's frictionless. In fact, while you might be able to track things online today, the world is increasingly mobile and augmented and connected, and so we can track offline behaviors more and more with things like QR codes and near-field computing and short URLs. Soon we'll be so tied to our online worlds, we'll be trackable too. And that means that everything around us is an experiment. I'm giving you a quick story about that. This is a friend of mine, Panos Ipidiotis. He's a professor of data and business at NYU. Did a study that proved that the way a review is written has more influence on whether you're going to buy the product than the rating the person gave it. A badly written, high-rated thing you assume is spam. A well-written, medium-rated thing you assume is reasoned and that the person took the time to write it for some reason. This actually led Zappos to correct the typos and spellings in reviews, which sent sales through the roof. So I'm going to end with 3 concrete examples because this stuff of thrust and lube has been pretty fanciful. First of all, taxis. There are 13,087 taxis in the city of New York with medallions. That's $6.5 billion in taxi medallion speculation. And the only thing that gets you is the ability to pick up and drop off someone in a particular place. Basically, the taxi world handles the problem of how to get together a rider and a passenger with a thrust-based solution. Dispatches, managing lobbying to City Hall, and so on. And then along comes Uber. Uber actually just won a big victory in DC 2 days ago when a city amendment that was trying to force Uber to charge 3 times as much as taxis was struck down. Because now, Uber can connect a driver and a passenger together instantly. But that's not what's cool. Uber is able to connect these guys and make money. What's cool is, based on that data, Uber is able to tell the drivers where they should idle to have a fare that's most likely, so they get better utilization than taxi cabs. You see what they did there? They make money a little bit from the fact that they're replacing taxis. They make a real money because they're able to get a higher utilization rate, so people are more likely to prefer them. Second example, flipping the classroom. In 2004, Jonathan Bergram and Aaron Sams decided they would change the way that homework was done. They made homework schoolwork and vice versa. They realized that once upon a time, the role of teaching was to broadcast information from central knowledge out to the villages. Find the best teacher in the village. But today, teachers can have this data anywhere. And today, broadcast is easy because of digital technology, things like Khan Academy, and that means you can get the best teacher in the world into your classroom for that one lesson on the moons of Pluto or whatever. Wait, Pluto's not a planet now. Bergman and Sams realized that in a frictionless world, the classroom should be flipped. You should study the content at home, do the homework at school, where the teacher can help it stick and can help you learn the way that's best for you through doing it together or doing it on the whiteboard or helping your peers or a video or whatever. And I'll give you a third example. Consider manufacturing and the maker bots and 3D printing. I mean, today these things are kind of where the Apple II was. You basically feed them this extruded filament or cornstarch and they print out 3D objects. But what happens when this stuff goes mainstream, the way that printers are mainstream? What's Toys R Us going to say when I choose to print my Lego blocks instead of going and buying some? What's UPS going to say when I don't want you to ship me a spare part, I just want you to ship me some filament? And what's Canadian Tire going to say when all the lemon laws that require an automotive manufacturer to keep car parts around for 10 years go away? Because, and by the way, I went out to Canadian Tire for my 2010 Volkswagen Jetta 2.5-liter clutch and flywheel. I couldn't find the part I'm looking for, so now I got to go to Canadian Tire. What about when I walk into Canadian Tire and they have a metal lathe that prints this stuff out for me while I'm waiting and no more inventory? A metal lathe in every Canadian Tire or Craig and Auto Parts or whatever, fundamentally changes the supply chain of a multi-billion-dollar industry because it's taken thrust, which was moving pieces of metal around, and replaced it with lube, which is data at the edge being printed and recycled at the point of delivery. So that was probably a lot of stuff to digest. In conclusion, I want to tell you where the next 50 billion-dollar companies are going to come from. They will be those that figure out where some established market leader relies too much on thrust instead of trying to lubricate the process. And what they will do is they will go in and they'll figure out what happens when that friction goes away. It is the best time to be a disruptor because while the steam age helped us overcome friction with thrust, the digital age allows us to lubricate things so the friction goes away. It's because we're moving from atoms to bits, and you will win here if you can make money from because instead of from actually selling something. If you figure out how to fire first and scale later, Lucas was lying, hand fired first. And if you live in the data and act like everything's an experiment, because I want you guys to build for the day when the friction in an industry is gone like Uber did. They assumed that the world of taxis would fall apart because it was full of thrust. When they found a way to make lube happen, which was that every driver could afford a smartphone, they're now making money because of that transaction and the fluidity and the ability to get better loads on cars. And that's going to happen over and over. So I really want you to enjoy the lube. This is the best time to be building a new startup that we've had in millennia. Thank you all very much. And if you go to Lean Friction, bit.ly/Lean Friction, fill in the survey, sign up for the book. We'd love to hear from you.